How many years did Grandpa serve in the military?
Grandpa, who was Dean Leon Aldrich, served 2 years from 1943 to 1945.
What branch of the military was he in?
He was in the Merchant Marines.
Which did what?
They shipped supplies to the theaters of war.
What are theaters?
That's where other countries are fighting.
Okay. What rank was he in?
He was a motor machinist mate.
What does that do?
That meant because he grew up on a farm, they probably put him in the engine room because he was sort of mechanically oriented. So if you're a machinist mate, that meant you worked in the engine room.
Mm-hmm. What war did he serve in?
He served in World War II.
Did he ever tell you about his war experiences?
He did.
What were they?
Well, one of the most memorable experiences he had, probably one of his first experiences, was when it was tradition when you first crossed the equator for the very first time, when you were a young sailor, they would shave your head, completely bald. And so they shaved my dad's head, and then what happened was he got scabs on his head because he got sunburned, and so he forever said that's the reason why he truly went bald, which is probably not true, but that's the excuse he made. Also, when he was in the Atlantic, that's where the U-boats would attack them, which are German submarines. And German submarines would shoot torpedoes at the Liberty ships, which is the kind of ship Dad was in. And he said they were always very scared, and they always wanted to see how close to the ladder they were, so that if there was an explosion or something like that, then they could get to the ladder. But in reality, if you're in the engine room of a ship and a torpedo hit it, those are usually the first guys to go. The worst thing he said, though, is when they were attacked by Stukas in the Mediterranean. You know what a Stuka is?
No, you tell me.
A Stuka is a dive bomber, and they dive and they get about 1,000 feet above, and they drop their bombs on the ships. They're pretty accurate. And my dad, actually, your grandfather, actually got bombed by several of them in the Mediterranean, and he thought he was a goner. But luckily, the Stukas missed for me and you. But that was the scariest he said he ever was. But later on, when the war kept going and the Americans were able to produce more of these Liberty ships, they started using convoys. And the convoys they'd use basically big numbers of ships, like maybe 100 Liberty ships, and they'd surround them by a bunch of warships. And that's what really started making it effective, that using depth charges.
Do you think he enjoyed the war sometimes?
I think sometimes he did. He made some friends, some buddies of his. They played cards and they'd go out and kind of carouse about wherever they were. Kind of as young guys will do. And they got to go to different places around the world. But probably the funniest story he ever told me was it was tradition for ships to have pets, and the pets would be like a mascot on a ship. And your grandfather had two monkeys, and another guy owned two monkeys. And I don't know what kind of monkeys they were. He just told me they were named Ellie and Joe, and Ellie was for Eleanor Roosevelt, and Joe was for Joseph Stalin. And the funniest story he ever told me was where one of those monkeys actually urinated on another British sailor in a port of call. But I won't go into that story in great detail because your teacher may not like it.
How old was he when he retired?
Grandpa went in when he was 19 years old, and he retired when he was 21 in 1945, and he never went back.
Do you think he ever missed the war?
I don't think he missed the war. I do think he looks at war as something that maybe should be done as a last resort, so there won't be worse wars later on. So now I'd probably say he didn't really miss it.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.